Let's take you live to Staffordshire South because we're now being told we've got about a 15-minute warning. We're being told we can expect the declaration between 10 to and 5 to 1. You can just see the incumbent there, Sir Patrick Cormack, the gentleman in the suit with a cup of coffee in his right hand. He retained the seat back in 2001 with a majority of 6,881. Labour has always been in second place. In theory, Labour needs a swing of 8.12% to win the seat. What's significant about this particular constituency is the turnout tonight, just 37.7%. That makes it the lowest at any constituency of the 2005 general election campaign. Obviously a knock-on effect, people thinking to themselves, well, why should we go and vote? Because we know who won anyway. We will have that declaration for you live as it happens here on BBC News 24. We're being told about 10 to 5 to 1. Stay with us for that if you can. Now, investigators from the United Nations have accused the American government of stalling on their requests to visit the detention center at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where the US is holding hundreds of terrorism suspects. The UN team said there had been no response to its repeated requests to check on the condition of the detainees.
Allegations of the continuing use of torture at the US military base at Guantanamo on Cuba are not new, but the United Nations watchdog on torture clearly feels that he's being obstructed in his requests to visit the camp.
I have received numerous allegations of both torture, ill treatment, etc., from detainees in Guantanamo, from lawyers, from non-governmental organizations. But it is our usual practice before we arrive at any kind of conclusions that we want to investigate. We want to carry out an objective investigation, taking into account all information from both governmental, non-governmental and other sources.
The UN experts have been trying to visit Guantanamo for 3 years. For more than a year, US officials have put off giving a definite response to the request for a visit.
So we don't have a definite no. We have not been told you are not allowed to visit Guantanamo Bay, but we also have not received a definite yes.
Some in Congress have
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld on Thursday again testified to Congress on Iraq and faced Democrat demands to resign over his mishandling of the war. Criticism of Guantanamo and the methods used there has been both forceful and bipartisan. Earlier this week, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin was forced to apologize for comparing interrogation methods used at the camp to those used by the Nazis. But the Democrats continued to demand an independent commission to investigate treatment of detainees. Now those demands will be reinforced by the statements coming from the UN in Geneva.
The writ of international human rights does not stop at the gates of Guantanamo Bay.
The UN's request includes the right to visit all American-held detainees abroad and followed the scandal over mistreatment of detainees in the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. US officials have acknowledged the damage caused to America's image in the Muslim world. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Here, the first smog warning of the summer has been issued by the government. The Department of the Environment says air pollution will reach high levels in London, the South East, East Anglia and central England. Soaring temperatures combined with high pollution tend to result in smog, bringing increased dangers for people with breathing difficulties or chest problems.
It's been a day for the sun worshippers, those of all varieties. But even a couple of steps into her front garden is too much for Maureen Hamilton. Instead, she spent today in here with her oxygen machine.
My R2-D2.
Are you a Star Wars fan then?
Well, not necessarily, but it was just such a good likeness.
Maureen has a chronic lung condition that means she's extra sensitive to pollution. Even on good days, she avoids going out in rush hour.
When I've fallen down in the street and people think, well, you're either drunk or on drugs, depending on how old you are. And the next thing you know, somebody's called an ambulance and you're carted off to an A&E where you're on oxygen and nebulising like mad, trying to get pollution out of your lungs.
While Maureen's been inside, though, this has been a familiar scene across the capital today. The park's full despite the first smog warning here for 2 years. A week of hot weather has sent ozone levels soaring.
The problem is an age-old one, and one that we've heard of before. Traffic in London is increasing, and with that, so are pollution levels.
With no wind or rain for days and plenty of sun, the stuff coming out of these has had its effect, monitored at roadside labs across the capital.
If I go here, which is Ealing, Horn Lane and Ealing,
the results are collected and analysed here at King's College London. This is the rising chart that shows why the smog warnings come today.
If you look over there, there definitely is a slight haze.
Frank Kelly heads up the team here and says cutting traffic is the only way to avoid further smog warnings. But he says we should also get things in perspective.
Nice temperatures like this we will enjoy, but of course we have the problem of air pollution associated with it. But if you fly off to Europe where the temperatures are even higher, such as in Athens or Italy, then of course the ozone levels will be even higher than this. In some instances they'll be twofold higher.
Until the rain comes at the weekend, the advice is simple for those with breathing problems. Take it easy and stay indoors if you can. Carl Mercer, BBC London News.
2:45. These are the headlines. Britain and the US call for African leaders to condemn Robert Mugabe's demolition program, which has left at least 200,000 people homeless. The votes have been counted in Staffordshire South. It's the last seat to be contested in this year's general election. We're expecting a result in about 10 minutes. Tony Blair has warned the European Union to accept change or risk a massive strategic failure. He also called for an end to trading insults. Time for the sports news. Here's Sally.
The second round at Wimbledon has brought both crushing disappointment for British tennis fans and a glimmer of hope for the future. There was a fantastic win for 18-year-old Briton Andy Murray on his debut on the show courts. He easily beat the 14th seed Radek Stepanek in straight sets for the greatest win of his career. But Tim Henman is out, beaten over 5 sets by the Russian Dmitry Tursunov.
They named a hill in his honour, but now it seems Tim Henman will never reach his personal summit, being Wimbledon champion. The rigours of Tuesday's 5-setter had taken their toll, although that wasn't immediately apparent as he started with a zip to his movement and his tennis to take the opening set.
What a brilliant start!
What turned a routine encounter with the unheralded Dmitry Tursunov into another epic marathon was a second-set misjudgment of a shot that dropped in.
Oh, it's in!
It cost Henman the set and gave the Russian nobody'd heard of, but now will never forget, the confidence to produce the breathtaking shot-making that took the match to a 5th-set showdown.
That's it!
Along the way, dubious line calls were disputed by Henman with language far fruitier than this, and you'd rather not know what he was saying to himself when a repeat of his earlier blunder spelt his downfall.
Ooh, he left it!
Tursunov ensured he'd pay the full penalty.
It's a tough pill to swallow right now, losing at this stage in sort of my home tournament, and you know, I certainly wasn't expecting to be out and to have free time now. So you have to go away and take it on the chin.
As the man who's been a beacon for British tennis for a decade took his leave, it felt like the torch needed to be passed on. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
Murray had walked onto court knowing Henman was out, so the pressure was on. But he wasn't overawed. The first set went with serve for the first 7 games, with Murray surviving break point on 2 occasions. And the 18-year-old Scot hadn't been able to get to grips with the Stepanek serve until the 9th game, when he made his first breakthrough.
He's got it. Yeah, Murray breaks. What a rally that was. Look at the response.
The very next game, he found himself on set point.
16-4.
And took a 1-set-to-love lead over his Czech opponent. Despite the last year having been the best in Stepanek's career, he appeared out of sorts. And Murray twice broke his serve in the next set, eventually winning that 6-4-2. Murray was the world number 312, Stepanek the world number 13. But it was all rather easy for Murray. He wrapped up the biggest game of his life in 3 straight sets.
It's got it! Oh my goodness! 6-4, 6-4, 6-4.
In the 3rd round, if I was to get into the 2nd week, then I think I would have a bit of a celebration, because I wasn't expecting that at all. So I'm just going to concentrate on my match on Saturday. I don't know who I'm playing yet, but hopefully I might get on bigger court next time.
Henman's gone, Murray is here. The king is dead. Long live the king. Jim Lumsden, BBC News.
Also out are the men's number 4 seed Rafael Nadal and Britain's last remaining woman, Jane O'Donoghue. But the reigning women's champion, Maria Sharapova, is looking in great form. She's through to the 3rd round after a sparkling display against Cecil Karatancheva. She won 6-love, 6-1. She only lost 4 points in the whole of the 2nd set. In cricket, Australia have answered their critics by dominating the one-day international against England at Chester Street to end their losing streak. Australia's batsmen, led by the recalled Andrew Symonds with 73, reached 266 for 5 in their 50 overs. In reply, England was soon in real trouble. They were 3 wickets down for just 6 runs. 44 from Flintoff and a late flourish from Darren Gough took England towards respectability, but they could only reach 209 for 9. And that's all the sport.
Sally's back in about half an hour. Now, counting is well underway in the constituency of Staffordshire South. We're live tonight at Wombourne. That's where the count's being held. The general election votes had to be rescheduled following the death of the Liberal Democrat candidate Joe Harrison shortly before polling day on May the 5th. 8 candidates are now waiting to hear the result. Joining us live tonight in the News 24 studio is the Independent newspaper's columnist and former Conservative MP Michael Brown, as well as the political editor of the Daily Telegraph, George Jones. Michael, I know you know Sir Patrick Cormack quite well. His big problem, one assumes, is knocking on doors and saying, vote for us because we can be a Tory government. No, we can't, not now.
That's right. Sir Patrick's family came from my constituency of Cleethorpes, which I used to represent until I was ejected by an ungrateful electorate in 1997. So I do know him very well, and his secretary, Lady Cormack, and my secretary shared an office together for 25 years. He's a lovely man. He fits the bill of the senior knight from the Shires. But he did make a very important point to me when we were talking about this a few weeks ago. And he said the nightmare is going to be that this is not a by-election. This is a continuation of the general election. At a by-election, you've got a new candidate replacing the outgoing MP. This is the MP seeking re-election. And there he is knocking on a door. But he can't say, and this is where the people of South Staffordshire have been deprived, he can't say, vote for me because if I am elected there could be a Conservative government. What he's having to do, which actually will suit him because he's a very individualistic Conservative candidate, you can't tell Sir Patrick Cormack what to do. He's not going to sign any contract of employment with the Tory Chief Whip that they were discussing yesterday. He is his own man, and actually his election material has basically said Cormack cares, and he's been knocking on the doors, placing his record of 35 years before the voters, and I would be very surprised if he doesn't get re-elected.
He must be pretty canny, though, because he didn't mention the Conservative Party once in any of his election issues, his pamphlets, apparently. I mean...
And in this extraordinary, unique situation, I think, to be fair to him, he's right to present himself as Sir Patrick seeking re-election, because the blunt truth is the election result for the rest of the country has been decided. Even in 1987, mind you, his independent streak has always been there. In 1987, when I was standing for re-election on the Conservative manifesto, if elected, you will get a Conservative government and a Tory MP, and you will get the poll tax. Well, Patrick Cormack had the foresight to recognise that it was going to be a disaster, and he said, if elected, I will oppose my own party on the poll tax. So he's always had an independent streak, which I think will serve him well tonight.
OK, George Jones, you're a local boy, born and bred. As far as the constituency is concerned, for the Labour Party, there's no obvious urban Labour centre to this.
No, it isn't. That's right. It's a sort of series of village, rural areas, dormitory areas around Wolverhampton. It's a beautiful part of the country, really lovely, bordering on to Shropshire and those areas. So it's ideal Conservative territory. He had a majority of, I think, of over 6,000 at the last general election, and he ought to have held the seat relatively comfortably, even though there's a low turnout.
What were the big issues? You mentioned Wolverhampton there. One of them was the local airport going from being a private airport to possibly a commercial airport, but all the candidates are against it.
Yes. Largely, I should think, on noise and pollution on those grounds. Of course, this election has meant a number of kind of fringe candidates have come into it, much in the way, it's not a by-election, it's the delayed general election, but you've had UK Independence Party standing there. But it's a fascinating political situation. First time I think it's happened for 50 years when a general election has been put on hold. It doesn't happen the same in the United States. If this happens, if a candidate, this was the Liberal Democrat candidate who died 6 days before polling day and it was put on hold, in the United States, if that happens, you carry on with the election. You don't call a halt to it in mid-flow. And in the House of Commons earlier today, they had business questions discussing their own affairs, and it was quite clear from that. Jeff Hoon, the leader of the House, said this was an issue they are going to discuss, the procedure that they do, because people pointed out that you could, I mean, it's a macabre thing, but you could have somebody who was terminally ill deliberately standing in the hope of disrupting a general election.
For example, you had a situation, this recent general election, where a fistful of independent candidates stood to make a point in Sedgefield. Supposing somebody wanted to make a point on the subject of euthanasia, and, as George said, rather a macabre thing, were to die in the Sedgefield constituency 48 hours before the count or the ballot had taken place, Tony Blair would be in exactly the same situation as Patrick Cormack. So I think the House of Commons is right to look at this anomaly, because it could throw up some extraordinary circumstances where the candidate expected to get elected could be the leader of a political party.
Now, you've nailed your colours to the mast. You think Sir Patrick's the best thing since sliced bread when it comes to being the local MP.
I am very fond of him.
What about the other candidates? What are they like?
To be absolutely honest, I don't know them at all. There is a different, obviously, different Liberal Democrat candidate to the one who tragically died before polling day. I'm not sure, is it the same Labour candidate?
It's not. I think the original Labour candidate stood down, but it was the Labour candidate who stood in 2001 against Patrick Cormack, and I think did increase his vote at that time, so he's come in. The other Labour candidate couldn't get time off from work to do it, and there's a Green Party candidate standing, I think, and others there.
If we're looking for anything, and to be honest, this is going to be an election which goes down in the history books for reasons of constitutional uniqueness, but the thing that I'll be looking a little bit closely at is the size of the UKIP vote.
Why?
Because we've had all this talk over the last few weeks about Europe. Europe's been, insofar as there is a national issue, UKIP's time has come, in a certain sense. I mean, we had one of the UKIP MEPs in the European Parliament earlier today praising the Prime Minister, suggesting that the Prime Minister was halfway towards joining the UKIP agenda. So I will be looking to see whether there is any nibbling at the Tory vote on that front. And a low turnout can sometimes, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that we're going to have a shock result here, but a low turnout does enable disproportionately candidates like the UKIP candidate, who's been making a lot of noise and flying a lot of posters and banners all over the shop.
What we're looking at just now is the returning officer discussing the result. The result is in. The returning officer is telling the candidates how the votes have been cast. If they agree with what he says, we will then have a result. So we're expecting that to happen in the next, 90 seconds, 2 minutes or so.
And I mean, it could be. It often is whether people will have saved their deposits. That's why they often go into those huddles. Some of the minority parties, because it can. Well, it can cost you money.
Points make prizes.
If you lost your deposits. So
do you agree with that analysis about UKIP?
Yes. I mean, we were saying when we were looking at the papers, I mean, Tony Blair is now donning a sort of Eurosceptic mantle. Gordon Brown called it, I think it was pro-European realism is the phrase that they're using. And say, yes, we are in favour of Europe, but, you know, Europe's got to be realistic and face up to things. So, but I don't think, I mean, I think the key thing, the opinion poll, there's an opinion poll in The Guardian, I think, earlier this week, which showed that Labour support had gone up since the general election. So it'll be fascinating to see, I mean, because it's a small turnout, you can't really make a judgment from it, but what will have happened to the Conservative? I mean, will the Conservative share of the vote fallen? Will Labour have gone up? I mean, is Labour, in a way, an amazing political phenomenon, New Labour and Tony Blair, in the way they have remained popular for so long, and the Conservative Party still unable, you know, to break out of where it's been on 33% of the vote. Yeah. It just cannot find it.
We're now being told, just to let our audience know, chaps, that the provisional result has been agreed by all the candidates. They have said, yes, we accept that. If the Tory vote is down, is that a slap in the face to the Tories? Is that the voters saying, yes, we haven't turned out because we don't like what you've done over the whole Michael Howard, is he dead, is he not dead thing that's been going on since May the 6th, May the 5th?
I suspect, to be blunt with you, Peter, it's probably just simply inertia will have overtaken. I don't think you're going to be able to read anything into the overlaying Tory story of the leadership. Bluntly, it's been a very nice hot day up in that constituency. I suspect that the whole election was deliberately kept low-key by the Conservative Party, not wanting to stir things up. I don't think there'll be any read across. Of course, and Patrick Cormack made it very clear to me. He said the last thing I want is for the Tory leadership election to be fought on my doorstep. And although I think there was one day when very quietly David Davis, who's a very good friend of Patrick Cormack's, did go across and do a bit of gentle canvassing. Basically, I think the last thing Patrick Cormack wanted was the Tory leadership candidates all beating a path up to South Staffordshire, getting their moment in the sun. He was very anxious to keep all of that separate.
But Patrick Cormack can't wait to get back to Westminster to take part in it. I mean, he's made quite clear he thinks Michael Howard should go sooner rather than later. I mean, he's one of those Tories who thinks that the Tories are in a real mess at the moment with up to 12 leadership candidates, Michael Howard's authority visibly draining away, and the public sort of just turning off from the Conservative Party. I mean, I disagree with Michael. I mean, I think if the Conservative vote is down, I think the turmoil in the party could have had some effect on it, because I think, again, Conservative Party activists, they will lose, or the proposal is they will lose their vote in choosing the next leader of the Conservative Party. So, I mean, that could have affected morale in the party. And interestingly, today they also announced that on July the 14th, I think it is, we are going to get the first proper by-election of this Parliament, because the Liberal Democrat MP for that constituency died very tragically just after winning the election.
That was in Cheadle.
In Cheadle, yes. She came to Westminster, took the oath as an MP in a wheelchair and died soon after that. So
that will be a serious test.
That'll be a serious test of where the party stands.
Well, as you can hear there, the returning officer is asking the candidates to join him up on the stage there in Staffordshire South. We're just about to get the result of the general election seat there. Patrick Cormack, Sir Patrick Cormack, standing for the Tories. He is the incumbent, of course. Paul Kalinauckas for Labour, and Dr. Joe Crotty for the Lib Dems. We can talk to our correspondent, I think, Reeta Chakrabarti. So, Reeta, not long to go now.
No, the result seems to be imminent, and the very strong impression we're getting here is that Sir Patrick Cormack has been re-elected as MP for Staffordshire South. What is going to be important is to see exactly what share of the vote he got this time round. The last two elections he's got roughly 50% of the share of the vote. Now, because the turnout was significantly lower this time round than in 2001, we're looking at him getting roughly between 13 and 14,000 votes for him to have retained his share of the vote. The other rumours that have been circulating around are that the fight between Labour, who came second last time, and the Liberal Democrats... We can hear him now.
I'm pleased to say we are now in a position to give you the count for the postponed parliamentary election for the constituency of South Staffordshire. It is on. OK. I'll start again. Can everybody hear me? Right, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we're now in a position to give you the results for the postponed parliamentary constituency election for the South Staffordshire parliamentary constituency held today, 23rd of June. And I'll read out the results in the normal formal way. Being the acting returning officer at the election for the South Staffordshire parliamentary constituency held on the 23rd of June 2005, I do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the election is as follows. Braid, Reverend David Oswald, Clause 28, Children's Protection Christian Democrats, 67. Ushall, Gary, English Democrats, Putting England First, 643. Cormack, Sir Patrick Thomas, the Conservative Party candidate, 13,343. Crotty Joanne, Liberal Democrat, 3,540. Davis, Adrian Michael, the Freedom Party, 434. Hurst, Malcolm William, the UK Independence Party, 2,675. Kalinaukas, Paul, the Labour Party candidate, 4,496. Sporer, Catherine Elizabeth Jane, Green Party against airport expansion, 437. The number of ballot papers rejected was 38, and I do hereby declare that the said Sir Patrick Thomas Cormack is duly elected for the South Staffordshire parliamentary constituency.
Mr. Returning Officer, it's my very pleasant duty to be able to thank you, but could I first of all say this has been a long, long haul, but when I look at those figures, it's almost been worth it, and I do want to thank the electors of South Staffordshire, who, in spite of the heat, and in spite of the fact that we already know who is in government, have turned out in fair numbers, perhaps not as many as we would have liked, but still fair numbers for this sort of election. Not that there's ever been this sort of election before, and I hope there won't be again. And they have given me a very good vote of confidence, for which I'm extremely grateful, and which I shall seek to earn and justify. But I would like to thank you, sir, and your staff, and particularly those who have toiled through the day in the polling stations and those who have toiled through the night counting the votes for the efficient way with which this election has been conducted. And I would also like to thank the police and all the others who have been involved in this extremely interesting example of English democracy. Could I thank my helpers, my agent, June Sharman, my chairman, Willem Rose, my campaign coordinator, Val Chapman, and my wife, Mary, and all the others, too numerous to mention, for what they have done. And I would also like to thank those of my parliamentary colleagues, some 80 of them, who have come to be a silent army of canvassers to try and make sure that all the electors of South Staffordshire were contacted during the last 3 weeks. This has been a long process. The general election was brought to a shuddering halt by a tragedy for which we still grieve, but this long delay does, I think, indicate, because there, but for the grace of God, could have gone any member of Parliament, including the Prime Minister, does indicate that the law may need a little re-examination. But that is not for tonight. For tonight, I have a profound sense of the responsibility that I continue to bear in South Staffordshire, and I would like to thank all my opponents present. I don't think I need to thank those who haven't bothered to come, but I would like to thank all my opponents who are present, and to congratulate them and to thank them for not winning. Ladies and gentlemen, you all want to go home now, but this has been a very special night, and I'm deeply grateful to everyone concerned. Thank you very much.
Sir Patrick Cormack there, thanking everyone who worked on his election campaign. His majority is now 8,847. It's gone up from 6,881. Significantly, his share has gone up as well. Keeping us company throughout this evening, our political correspondent, Reeta Chakrabarti. Reeta, what do you make of that?
Well, I think he's clearly come through it very comfortably. The whole detail is in the figures, and as you said there, the important thing was, even though turnout had gone down, it hadn't affected him adversely. I wouldn't say that they felt it was an easy haul. Certainly talking to Sir Patrick's aides and officials earlier in the evening, they really didn't know how the low turnout was going to affect him, but clearly it hasn't at all, and he's maintained, slightly increased his share of the vote. So I think we heard a very relieved Sir Patrick there. He sounded quite emotional in a sense. I think he has found it a very long haul. He's been missing Westminster. He's been missing the fact that his seat has been taken by somebody else, and I think he's itching to get back.
And on that issue, on that idea of him being itching to get back, I mean, if one is the Tory party leader waiting in the wings, the chap or the woman, whoever it is that follows Michael Howard, they will be looking at this in a very positive way.
Yes, well, it's in a way a bit difficult to read too much into it. I suppose you might say that if his share of the vote had gone down substantially, then you might be able to interpret that as being something to do with the Tory leadership turmoil that is going on at the moment. But to a certain extent, Sir Patrick had campaigned on his own personal record. I think I mentioned a little earlier that his key election leaflet had no mention of the fact that he was a Conservative at all. So he was going on his reputation, his record, the fact that he's been an MP for 35 years, and clearly it's stood him in good stead.
Reeta, thanks very much. Still keeping us company here, Michael Brown and George Jones. Michael, your reading of that?
It's a straightforward vote of confidence in Patrick Cormack. I agree with absolutely everything that Reeta has said. Low turnout. He didn't make any mention of the Conservative Party. He was simply saying, basically, to the voters, I've served you for 35 years. If you think I'm a decent Member of Parliament, he does have a voice of his own. He doesn't always toe the party line. And I think that's basically a personal result for him, which he can be personally very satisfied about. He has put up his majority on a low turnout. There's been a swing to the Conservatives, but I think he deserves the credit.
George?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I mean, it is appalling, really, that the turnout was so low in this instance. I mean, people seem to take voting as a very sort of hit-and-miss affair. So, I mean, I think that's disappointing. I think the Conservatives will be pleased that it doesn't look as if their leadership traumas have affected the vote. I would have thought Labour and the Liberal Democrats will both be quite disappointed with this, and it does make the next, well, the by-election, because this wasn't a by-election, but the by-election in Cheadle next month, that is going to be very interesting, and going to be very interesting to see whether the Conservatives, they've got a bit more momentum here, they got a bit of momentum at the general election. Can they begin to build on that? I mean, that's vital for the Conservatives. So this was good. It was running, I think, is it running on the bottom of your tape there? It takes the Conservative strength in the House of Commons to 198 now, so it cuts the government majority by one, but they're still below that tally of 200, which is an important psychological mark. But of course, if they win the by-election in July, that would take them up to 199.
Both of you a little earlier had been saying how there was no obvious Labour heartland in this constituency. What's your reading of how the Lib Dems did or didn't do? They got 3,540.
Yeah, they've never performed very strongly in this constituency. I think they was third last time. I think it's always been the Labour Party that has been the principal challenger. Frankly, you can't read anything into that particularly at all. At the end of the day, the Labour Party usually comes second in this particular constituency, and they have done by a reasonable margin over the Liberal Democrats this time. And by definition, the Liberal Democrat candidate obviously wasn't able to get known in the way. I mean, the uniqueness of this election is whatever parliamentary candidate comes from all the political parties, normally every single candidate is new. But this time, the Liberal Democrat candidate is brand new, only been there 7 weeks, likewise with the Labour candidate, facing the Tory candidate, who's been there for 35 years.
Sir Patrick comes back down to the Commons, what, in a couple of weeks' time now?
Well, he'll be there on Monday. He'll be there on Monday. And he's very worried because, as Reeta was saying, he has a traditional seat, which is close to the gangway, just above the front bench, and he is always there. He's one of the most regular attenders in the House of Commons, and somebody else has been sitting in that, so it'll be interesting to see whether he can reclaim it, and he'll have to go in, I think it is before prayers, isn't it? You have to go in and put a little green card in to mark your seat and ensure that you can get it.
The one advantage that Sir Patrick does have is that, first of all, he is, to be fair to him, a regular attender in the chamber, not only during question time, but for the main debate, certainly the opening speeches of the main debate thereafter. So if whoever is sitting in his seat is determined to stick there, that person is going to have to be there for all the debates. But I think Sir Patrick will win that battle.
Now, he comes back down to the Commons suitably energised, one assumes. Michael Howard just doesn't want to see him because Sir Patrick's going to be saying, well, you are a lame duck leader, we've got to keep this thing going and get rid of you. Presumably, does Sir Patrick fall into that category? He wants the whole thing happening before the party conference?
Yes, he is one of those ones, MPs. Well, I think virtually most Tory MPs you talk to now would like this to be got through much more quickly. I mean, they fear that it's going to be months with all this. We had Theresa May yesterday. I mean, I don't know what, I mean, that's the wrong way to say it, but Theresa May was the latest.
She's about the 13th.
She's about
another
13th.
Another one to add to the list.
But the only woman as yet to throw or dip a toe in the water, throw a hat into the ring for the leadership. But it's, you've only got you've got now 198 Conservative MPs, and when you have 13 of those, I mean, it's nearly 10% saying they want to stand for the leadership, and you could go to a party conference in Blackpool in October, which will just be a beauty contest of all these leadership contenders. The media will love it, but it's going to be could be disastrous to the party image.
We will love this circus. People like George and myself have got sort of between 4 and 5 months of this palaver yet to go. But it's going to bore the country and the voters, and basically it gives Tony Blair a free ride, effectively, to Christmas. The other danger is, of course, that the constituency party chairman, who are going to change the rules, might well decide not to do that.
Let's cross live back to my colleague Reeta Chakrabarti. Reeta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, I'm joined now by the winning candidate, Sir Patrick Cormack. Sir Patrick, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
In your speech, you described this as being a long, long haul. Why did you say that?
Well, because it's been going on for over 10 weeks, which is quite a long haul. But it's produced a very good result, as far as I'm concerned. I had to fight 2 campaigns, one as a member of the team, and another solo, and it's worked out very well, and I'm profoundly grateful to the electorate. And obviously it gives me great responsibilities. I must live up to this, and I think I can. And I think it does show that the personal element in politics is not dead.
Some people have commented that the word Conservative didn't appear in your key election literature once. Why was that?
Oh, they know I'm a Conservative, and it was blue. But I was having to fight a personal campaign because, you know, the leadership's going to change, to whom we don't know. The policies are going to change in various ways. I had to concentrate on my track record and fight a personal campaign. I'm not ashamed of my Conservative allegiance. I'm deeply proud of it. I'm an absolute Tory, but the fact is, I had to fight a personal campaign, and I do know that a lot of people in this constituency who are not of my political persuasion do support me because of what I've sought to do for them as individuals and for the constituency. I shall continue to do that.
Some people have suggested that you left out the word Conservative because of the turmoil that is going on over the Tory leadership.
No. It was just my way of doing things.
Okay. What are your thoughts now about the way in which this poll has been delayed for so long?
Well, you know, at this stage in the morning and immediately after the declaration of the result, I'm not going to come out with a whole series of deep pronouncements, but I have said several times in recent weeks that the law needs looking at, and it does. And when I get back next week, I shall be talking to colleagues about this and to the Electoral Commission, with whom I've already had initial conversations.
And the law needs to be looked at in what way?
Well, the length of the delay, whether it should apply to every candidate regardless of allegiance, whether you should have a position whereby the Prime Minister of the day could be prevented from fulfilling his constitutional duties by the death of a maverick candidate. One of the candidates tonight got less than 100 votes, 67 votes. If he died yesterday, we'd have had to go through it all again. That must be nonsense.
So you want to see the law completely overhauled?
I do indeed, yes.
You will, of course, be taking your seat back in Westminster next week.
I will.
Where will you stand on this whole question of the Conservative leadership? What do you want to see happen?
Let me get back first.
But you must have had thoughts.
I don't propose to declare my candidature tonight.
Right. You're not going to join the long list?
Not yet.
But in which direction would you like to see the party going? As you've said repeatedly, you haven't been able to talk about Michael Howard as the leader. He's leaving in October. You don't know who the leader is. That's partly why you've had to campaign on this very personal ticket. What sort of direction do you want to see the party going in?
The Conservative Party is a great party. It's a national party, or nothing. The Conservative Party has got to stand for those things it has stood for through the ages, the maintenance of institutions of this country and the elevation of the condition of the people, in Disraeli's words. And I want a candidate who can encapsulate that philosophy in modern terms, who can command the troops in Parliament and also command from the dispatch box the House of Commons and reach out to the country and make them believe that this is a faith that is worth believing in.
You're somebody who in the past has voted for Kenneth Clarke. Would you like to see him joining the contest?
Oh, you're not going to draw me on that. He's a jolly good friend of mine. If Ken decides to stand, we'll have to see. But I'm not talking about personalities tonight. Anyhow, I might stand myself.
All right, Sir Patrick Cormack, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
So there you have it. Not going to be standing for the leadership contest himself, but clearly very happy and very relieved to be being sent back to Westminster. And that's back to you in the studio.
Reeta, thanks very much. If you're just joining us here on BBC News 24, let's just show you the results that were declared, about 15, 20 minutes ago. Reeta, they're talking to the winning incumbent, Sir Patrick Cormack. He polled 13,343. Paul Kalinaukis for Labour polled 4,496, and Dr Joe Crotty for the Lib Dems polled 3,540. Interestingly, in this constituency, this quite diverse constituency, the majority for Sir Patrick is 8,847. That's up from 6,881. As well as his majority having gone up, the share of the vote has gone up as well. Keeping us company here at BBC News 24, Michael Brown, columnist from the Independent newspaper, and George Jones, political editor from The Telegraph. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that was classic Sir Patrick, even talking about the party leadership. But one gets the feeling he's quite looking forward to ruffling a few feathers, not on Michael Howard as an issue, but also on this the law that set down the process that led to what we've seen this evening.
Yeah, you're not talking about a brand new MP going back to Westminster, going down to Westminster for the first time. You're talking about the second or third longest serving member of Parliament going and taking his seat, so he can get straight in, roll up his sleeves and do what he feels he needs to do about putting before the Electoral Commission the need for the change in the law. And as we've discussed earlier on the programme, Peter, the fact of the matter is, let us imagine if this had happened to Tony Blair in Sedgefield. Tonight we'd be waiting for Tony Blair's election result up there. What would have happened during the last 6 weeks? So there is an anomaly, and I think Patrick Cormack is absolutely right to pursue that. But on the wider issue, he's a wise old buzzard, and he's going to be on the Tory leadership case, putting his two pennyworth in. The one thing that I feel rather sad on his behalf about is that over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, since the House came back, the Conservative Party has re-elected the Executive Committee of the 1922 Committee, the powerful body of backbenchers on which Sir Patrick served. And of course, unfortunately, his seat on that has already been taken. And it does mean that he's missed out on being a member of the Executive. But I'm sure that somebody with his seniority will let his views be known on what he thinks about the leadership fairly smartly.
There was a very grumpy meeting, we understand, of the 1922 Committee. I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday night this week. But at the highest level, what do the party leaderships think about this law that governs the process that we've seen this evening?
Well, I think that there is a general view in the House of Commons that it's got to be changed. Jeff Hoon, who's the leader of the Commons, member of the Cabinet, although he represents, in a way, the whole House of Commons, made quite clear that he wants it to be looked at. And actually, Patrick Cormack is on the House of Commons Commission, which is the body which sort of runs the House of Commons itself internally. And I think they're going to be meeting on Monday. So if he's back in Monday, he'll be there to be able to put his view. But it does seem to be an anomaly that they must deal with in some way. I mean, whether you could get a replacement candidate to come in, that might be a possibility, or run the election, and then if the candidate or the party of the candidate who had died won the election, then perhaps you wouldn't have to have a by-election again after that. But I think there are ways around this. It's quite clearly an anomaly, and one which could have quite serious consequences, given the way now, as Michael said, I mean, you get fringe candidates, you get people deliberately standing to cause trouble in a particular constituency. And I think you still have this thing, isn't it, where you can have people have multiple names on the constituencies as well.
In our last minute or so, let's just look at the party leadership as an issue. I mean, what's your reading, Michael, of the way the party leadership is going? I mean, we've got this drip of candidates, you know.
I'm afraid that Michael Howard is absolutely determined to stay at the wicket, humiliate himself. He's virtually under orders from his henchwoman who runs his private office, a girl called Rachel Whetstone, who is the ringleader shouter for David Cameron, who's the protege of Michael Howard. Basically, they want to fatten David Cameron up for the electoral market to try and stop David Davis. Michael Howard doesn't want to see David Davis succeed him, and he's determined to do everything he can, including humiliating himself and, if necessary, trashing the Tory party for the next 5 months in order to stop David Davis. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a race between David Davis and David Cameron.
Just point out that Michael is a cheerleader for David Davis, so just a little sort of...
I used to be the next-door neighbour MP for David Davis, so I do know him fairly well.
But it's David Davis's to lose at the moment, I think. I mean, he's not a shoe-in to win, but at the moment, everybody thinks he is a likely candidate, and if he sort of gets wrong, he makes some mistake, he could lose it. But no one is yet in a position, I think, to challenge him seriously. David Cameron, I think it's going to end up a battle between David Davis and David Cameron, although Ken Clarke is still not yet decided that he won't stand.
All the anti-Davis candidates are going to have to agree on one name, and it will be David Cameron.
We will leave it there. George Jones, Michael Brown, thank you both very much. OK, just to sum up for you what's happened in the past half hour. So Patrick Cormack was and still is indeed the MP for South Staffordshire. He polled 13,343. His majority is up on this time 2001. Weather time.